You're listening to the Sustainable Hour. Our next guest is Dr. Pia Brous. Pia is a psychiatrist in Melbourne and is very active at the moment in a number of groups that are working to stop the gas hub in Western Port Bay. So Pia, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm delighted to be here. I do need to say that the group that I'm involved with is actually really involved in a webinar on the 15th of September at 7 o'clock to not the Western Port Bay issue, which of course is important, but to look at the our concerns for the climate and its impact of the proposed climate-led economic recovery of the federal government. And how I got involved in this, I'm really here as a citizen, a medical practitioner, and I got involved in the organising of the webinar. And one of the areas we wanted to cover was health. And I was absolutely shocked that I was the only doctor in the group. There's quite a number of people involved with this. Nobody in the group knew about the health impact of climate change. Nobody knew about the worldwide organisation of doctors and other health professionals declaring a health emergency, secondary to the climate emergency. Nobody knew about the 40 million doctors and other health professionals who are behind the organisations that have petitioned all the G20 leaders to please ask for a healthy COVID-led economic recovery that addresses climate change. They didn't know about the 90,000 doctors who are 75% of us in Australia who have sent a letter to the Morrison government, and they didn't understand that these health impacts are affecting us now. And one of the members of the group told me about your show and asked me if I'd tell you all about it. So here I am, if you want to hear about it.
Terrific.
Please. Pia, can you start with, if you like, a précis version for those listeners who may not be aware of the health impacts, the obvious health impacts that climate change is having on the community?
Okay, so there are 6 main areas. This has been covered in the Lancet, which is the gold standard journal for medical practitioners around the world. There are 6 main areas. I'm happy to talk to, there's 3 that I'd be glad to talk to. One is heat stress. One is air pollution. One is vector-borne diseases. These are diseases that come to us from other sources by an intermediary, usually insects, not only insects, but usually insects. One is the impact of extreme weather events, bushfires, storms, floods. One is water and food insecurity, and the other one's mental health. And there are 5 vulnerable groups: the elderly, children and unborn children, which I would like to talk about, those with pre-existing illness, those who work outdoors, and rural and remote inhabitants, and the Indigenous. So it's very significant.
Well, yes, please talk about children and the unborn children.
Okay, well, this came from the issues of air pollution, and I'd like to state that the National Bushfire and Climate Summit in 2020 stated categorically that these terrible fires were related to climate change, and we know, we will recall that the air pollution down the east coast of Australia was very significant. What the listeners and you may not know is that there were 417 deaths and more than 4,000 casualty admissions for people with worsened asthma, respiratory and cardiac conditions. And it's been known for a long time that inhaling smoke is really bad for children's lungs. Children are developing and their body systems are developing. So I have to say that when the Malakuta fires were on and we were seeing all these images of families with their children, I was completely gobsmacked, because this literature, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm not a physician or a GP, but I knew about the impact of smoke on children's lungs. It's quite well known. And Scott Morrison on his holiday in Hawaii didn't seem to think to ring his chief public health officer and say, is there a problem for children? Do we need to get them off quickly? I was horrified. So it's really bad. And the other issue that is come through for unborn children, which is a recent study, you may recall the Hazelwood mine fire in 2014. This was in a very hot summer, and it was sparks from a bushfire that caused this fire. And the operators of the mine were rightfully censured, and there were proceedings against them. But it was a very hot year, and heat leads to more bushfires. And there were 6 weeks of smoke in the Latrobe Valley, and the people of Morwell were affected. And people who were vulnerable were told they really should leave, but nobody knew about pregnant women. This has just come through. And there's been a study of what happened to the unborn children of these pregnant women who inhaled this smoke. And this is a study. Everything I'm saying today, by the way, is online. Anyone can, any listener, any of you can check it. It's freely available. This study looked at what the respiratory health outcomes of these children over the next 2 to 4 years. The parents reported their symptoms, their medications, all their visits to doctors, and they compared 3 groups: the unborn children, what their respiratory history was like when they were born, children who were in Morwell during the smoke, and children who were not in Morwell during the smoke. And the ones who were most affected were the unborn children. They had the worst trajectory for respiratory conditions and illnesses after they were born. And it's postulated that either the toxins from the smoke crossed the placenta into the babies, because if you think about it, when babies are inside the mothers, they don't need to use their lungs, but their lungs need to be prepared for life outside the womb. So that's a physiological process that we all had to undergo to live apart from, to breathe in air. So either the toxins crossed the placenta and affected this, or it affected the mother's health, either their immunity or they had inflammation. It's a very significant finding, which I found really, really gobsmacking. Yeah.
Was there any research into the children and unborn children in Morwell before that fire? Because in the Latrobe Valley, they've had the power stations there pushing out carbon emissions since the 1960s.
I don't know, but the group of children who were there during the Morwell fires had been born before the fires. I can't answer that. I don't know if there's been research into that. I can try and find out, but I don't know.
I doubt it.
I don't know.
Mm. And look, another area of your expertise, if you like, interests me again, and it sort of comes back to where we were speaking earlier on to Rebecca, and that is, I'm quite interested in how you change people's opinions who are completely and absolutely blinkered and have I don't know what you say, swallowed the right-wing propaganda that green policies are ruinous to our economy and to our government.
It's very, very difficult. It really is. And you have to find something that you want to change, that they want to change. You have to find something in their sphere of interest with people who are like this. And sometimes you don't know whether you've affected change or not. It comes to mind, I mean, I've seen a whole array in my area, a whole array of people who have presented to me over decades who had, there's a spectrum of awareness in the community about the importance of mental health, from those who don't want to know anything about it and will only accept it when it's at the most extreme end, and from those who are more aware. And, I worked in, you see this in medicine anyway, I worked in the Children's Hospital casualty before I did psychiatry. I worked in the casualty for a while. And the cases that distressed everyone the most were families that came in with children who were quite literally dying of cancer. Some of them died in the casualty, some of them died in the wards, because the parents were absolutely anti-doctor and they would only accept alternative medicine. And they only came when there was nothing more that could be done, which of course confirmed their view that doctors were useless. So, we see this in medicine across the whole area. You have to find something to affect change. You've got to find something that someone is of interest to them. And for some of these people who are so rigidly opposed, it probably is self-interest. It's got to be something that appeals to their self-interest. And for many, it may well be that the cost of doing nothing is going to be far greater than the cost of doing something. And I'm reminded about the doctors' campaign against big tobacco. I was involved with this when I was a medical student. There was an organisation called Bugger Up, you may or may not recall, which was medical students and doctors who went around defacing cigarette ads. Now, I didn't actually go and deface them. I have been mostly in the cautious group that Rebecca Huntley described. And I was really very busy, but I was certainly involved in the benefits that we had benefits to raise money to pay for people's court costs in the magistrates' court. And when I followed this, in the end, the fight was won against big tobacco, because the message got across to, I think it was the Netherlands that changed first, that it was more expensive to permit cigarette smoking than to stop it. You know, the costs, and there's no upside with cigarettes. It's all downside, but the cost of dealing with the consequences, this is the hip pocket nerve. So when I was a medical student, I remember the consultants were so distressed. We saw it on the wards, people dying of lung cancer and horrible respiratory and cardiac conditions because they'd smoked. And it didn't come from the doctors, it came from the hip pocket nerve. So you've got to find something that someone might be interested in. It's the only way you can get through to them. And some people just are not going to listen. And sometimes, you know, change happens a bit like the knight's move in chess. Some people take off like a rocket, and some people, you plant a seed, you don't think you got anywhere. I've seen this happen. And then they might come back next week and say, I've had this great idea. I've had this wonderful idea. Oh, what was the wonderful idea? They say, well, look, I thought of this. And it's actually the idea I gave them. But they say it's their idea. And I think, I don't care as long as they've got the idea. So that's a wonderful idea. Why didn't I think of that? And the other is people who come later. You've planted the seed, and then 8 years later, they'd come back and say, I think I want to talk to you. And I'd say, well, that's fine. Come in. But why have you come back now? And they'd say, because what you said made sense. And I'd say, well, why did it take 8 years? And they said, I wasn't ready. So
exactly. Rebecca talked about something that had influenced her. Yeah. And that was a seed that was planted when a 15-year-old girl in Sweden one day decided to walk alone down to the parliament and sit in front of the parliament and say, I am on school strike. Just one girl, one idea, one seed. But the impact that this has had, it's certainly shown that it rang a bell with so many others of her age group. The anxiety that Greta shared, everyone out there, millions of young people connected with that. And Pia, what is your take on that generation that grows up now with that anxiety? What are you saying to them with your expertise? And
what I'd say is knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. You can't be passive in the face of this, and they need to have the knowledge. So people need to know what these health consequences are, who are the vulnerable groups, and do something about it. So what I'd really love any listener today to do is to know about these 6 areas, and I'm happy to mention a few more, please, before the end of the program. To take personal action, like you've got to deal with heat stress appropriately and keep hydrated. You've got to wear insect repellent now whenever it gets warm. It's really critical. And if this gas-led recovery goes ahead, maybe they'll go, we're still in a democracy. We all have rights. We can go and talk to our MP and ask them why, if they support this, why are they doing it? Because what they're supporting, a gas-led recovery, is not a transition, a healthy transition to renewables. The natural gas creates CO2, and there are gas leaks as well, and it creates methane, which is, I wrote this down, it's 105 times more likely to impact on climate change. And the question to ask a politician is, why are you supporting a policy that's poisoning us? And if they don't understand it, remember that most politicians come from the humanities, business, law. They probably stopped science after year 10. They probably weren't even listening because they weren't interested in it. And the human brain isn't mature until about 22, 23. So they don't have any background for it. There are 4 MPs, I've looked this up, in the federal parliament, in the House of Representatives, who have a medical or nursing background. Most of them don't know any of it, don't have the concept, never grasped it. And if they say things like, look, you know, Australia's such a small country, what are we contributing to climate change? We don't need to do anything about it. This is what you can say. Well, in World War II, we were a much smaller country than we are today, and we pulled our weight against a toxic, destructive foe. In the pandemic, we are doing better than countries are having disastrous rates of COVID-19, but we're pulling our weight with vaccines and with treatments. And Scott Morrison only today or yesterday announced the number, you know, he's ordering millions more vaccines than we need, and it'll be free here, and then it'll be donated to countries in need. We're pulling our weight against an implacable, terrible disease. This is no different. It's just not different.
Yeah. Terrific, Pia. Now, I just want to clear up something I said earlier on, that there were groups here against the the groups that you're part of,
Yes.
Against the Western Port gas hub. Is that true or not?
Yes, there would be people involved with the planning of the webinar who are active in this. My particular environmental group is Stopadani McNamara, so we've been really focusing on coal, fossil fuels, and climate change, and I feel more fluent with that.
Sure. So there's a whole lot of different groups coming from different areas that are part of organising the webinar.
Yes, which will be looking at the impact of the proposed, if it happens, gas-led recovery from an economic point of view. So Mark Ogg from the Australia Institute will be speaking on climate. So Penny Sackett, who's the professor at the Climate Institute at the ANU and was a chief scientist for Australia, will be speaking. And I've spoken with Doctors for the Environment, who I think are a completely wonderful group, and they're providing a speaker who's from the Doctors for the Environment Committee in Western Australia to speak about the health impacts. And that's on the 15th of September at 7 o'clock. And any listeners interested, if you go to the website for PECAN, pecan.org.au, that's the Port Phillip Emergency Climate Action Network. There are others involved. You can see how to sign up for it.
Okay. And just clarify it's on the 15th of September?
Tuesday, the 15th of September at 7 o'clock.
I've been saying the 22nd, so...
No, it's the 15th.
15th, yeah. Well, you'll know that. Okay, terrific. Mick?
So we heard Victoria talk about the difference that she believes women can make when it comes to talking and taking action and making decisions that will get us out of this mess, basically. What's your take on that? You heard what she was saying. And how do you see that aspect of the difference between how men and women do politics?
Goodness me, I don't. I'd have to think about that. Goodness. I'd rather give a thoughtful response to that. I don't think I could do it justice off the cuff like this. So I'm sorry. I'm going to pass on that one. I'm happy to think about it and get back to you about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mick, I can. It's an irony, bearing in mind the guests that we've had on the program this week. We know that our council has 3 women of the 12 members. 2 of those women are on the leadership block group. That's the mayor and the deputy mayor. The strange thing is one of them is dyed-in-the-wool Labour and the other one's dyed-in-the-wool Liberal. And both of those were anti-climate change at one point, you pointed out, anti the climate change emergency. The third woman is a Green candidate. And we know that she and another fella are the Greens environmentalists on council, and they're outvoted by the other 2 women. So it's a sort of an irony that we were talking about we should need more women in there because they'll be good for the environment. We're showing that it isn't the case in Geelong. Sorry, Pia, I took over your spot.
No, it's really fine. I'd just like to say the climate emergency is a health emergency. Look, we doctors are very conservative. I have never seen doctors do this, declare a worldwide health emergency. I've never seen 40 million doctors and health professionals petition the G20. I've never seen anything like this. This is a health emergency. And for the listeners, this is about your parents and grandparents. Health stress kills the elderly. This is about you, health stress, air pollution, insect-borne diseases like Ross River virus and dengue fever, dengue fever can be sorry, I'm losing my words.
Just continue.
I will continue. Extreme weather events. We're talking about food insecurity and water insecurity and mental health. This is you, your children, your unborn children. This is right now. It's not something down the track. It's happening right now. And so it's a double whammy. It's a climate emergency. It is a health emergency. Yeah. That's, if people are denying climate change, maybe they'll think about health now that we know what a pandemic can do.
Exactly.
Terrific, Pia. Thanks very much for your time.
You're welcome.
Appreciate all the best on the 15th. We'll certainly be there.
Okay.
And joining in and reporting on it. It's really important. There's so many people, groups across, like right across our society, that are saying no gas-led recovery. That's not what we need, and it's being ignored. So yeah, I think we haven't heard the last on that, and more power to you guys for putting on this webinar that people can be informed. Yep. So
just one last word. If there are any listeners or anyone listening down the track who's confused about these ideas, you don't need to know anything about science. You don't need to know anything about climate science or health or psychiatry, none of this. You just need to know vested interest. So whose vested interest is being served by policies? I rest my case.
Well done. Well put. Well put. Thank you very much again.
Brings us back a little way to last week's podcast, where we had a guest who, if you like, brought it back to the raw language and said this is not a question of political donations or lobbying. This is corruption at the government level, and it's about time we started talking about it.